Have you ever stopped to think why about a third of the world seems to be driving on the wrong side of the road? I mean, it's one of the most basic, everyday things, and yet we're completely divided on it. This isn't just some random quirk. It's a story of swords, revolutions, and empires, and it's written right onto our modern streets. Okay, let's get into it.
So here's the roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the ancient origins of keeping left, then we'll look at the powerful forces that pushed a lot of the world over to the right. We'll see how empires literally drew the modern traffic map, check out the countries that actually dared to switch sides, and finally take a look at how this whole division plays out today.
So here's what that divide actually looks like. About 65% of the world's population drives on the right. But that other 35%? Well, it's not small. It accounts for about 75 countries and territories, and we're talking major nations like the UK, Japan, India, and Australia. The left-hand tradition is a really powerful and persistent minority.
To understand why anyone ever drove on the left to begin with, we have to go back in time, way back, long before cars, to an era where the biggest danger on the road wasn't a speeding driver, but a drawn sword. This is the sword arm theory, and it's pretty much the most widely accepted reason for left-hand traffic. See, since most people, we're talking 85 to 90%, are right-handed, keeping to the left meant your dominant, sword-wielding arm was always facing any potential threats coming your way. This was actually a key defensive strategy for Roman legions, and then in 1300 AD, Pope Boniface VIII even made it an official rule for pilgrims traveling to Rome.
The way people used horses also backed this rule up. A sword is usually worn on the left hip, which makes it super awkward to get on a horse from the right side, so riders would mount from the left. To do that safely on a busy road, you needed your horse on the left-hand side so you weren't stepping out into traffic. It was just practical.
Okay, so if keeping left was the ancient, logical standard, what happened? Well, two major historical forces showed up in the late 18th century that started pushing the world to the right. One was about hauling freight in America, and the other was about a revolution in France.
The shift in America started with these enormous Conestoga wagons. Now, they didn't have a driver's seat, so the teamster would ride the rear left horse. This gave his right arm the best position to use the whip. But sitting on the left meant he needed to pass other wagons on his own left side, just so he could see the clearance and not crash. This simple, practical need is what pushed American traffic to the right.
At the very same time, over in France, a completely different kind of revolution was happening. Before 1789, the French aristocracy always took the left side of the road, forcing all the common people over to the right. So, after the revolution, driving on the left became a really dangerous symbol of the old regime. The new order embraced the right side of the road, and by 1794, it became the law in Paris.
And this was really the major turning point in Europe. The new French standard of driving on the right got exported all across the continent by Napoleon Bonaparte's armies. As he conquered different nations, he imposed the new rule. The only major power he couldn't get to was Britain, which, safe across the English Channel, just doubled down on its ancient tradition of keeping left. So with Britain and France on opposite sides of the road, the stage was set for a global divide. In the 19th century, these standards were spread all over the world, not by choice, but by colonization. The modern traffic map is basically a shadow of old colonial empires. You know, the British Empire was the single greatest force in spreading left-hand traffic, or LHT, from their grand vision of a Cape to Cairo route in Africa to the massive Indian subcontinent to Australia and New Zealand. British rule meant British road rules. That's why you see LHT in so many disconnected parts of the world today. But it wasn't always that simple. For example, the Netherlands switched to the right under Napoleon, but its huge colony in Indonesia kept the original left-hand rule. And Portugal switched to the right, but its colony of Mozambique is surrounded by former British territories, so it just kept driving on the left to make border crossings easier. Sometimes pragmatism won out. Japan is the big exception here. It was never a British colony, but it drives on the left. The reason goes all the way back to the samurai era. To keep the scabbards of their swords from clashing, which was a huge insult that could lead to a duel, samurai always walked on the left. This custom became the unofficial rule of the road, and it got locked in later when British engineers built Japan's first railway system to run on the left. So once a country has its rule, it's set in stone, right? Well, not always. Several nations have actually taken on the massive logistical and social challenge of switching sides, and they've done it for wildly different reasons, with wildly different results. These 4 examples show you just how different a switch can be. Sweden's 1967 switch to the right was this masterpiece of planning, all for safety and to integrate with its neighbors. Now, contrast that with Myanmar in 1970, where a dictator's random whim caused total chaos. And then you have reversals. Okinawa switched back to the left in 1978 to get back in sync with Japan after the U.S. occupation. And sometimes it's just about money. In 2009, Samoa switched to the left simply to import cheaper cars.
And this kind of mismatch creates a really serious safety hazard. In places like the U.S. Virgin Islands or Myanmar, the rule of the road doesn't match the cars people are driving. A driver sitting on the wrong side of the car has a huge blind spot. To pass a big truck, they have to pull their entire vehicle into the oncoming lane just to see if it's clear. It's incredibly dangerous.
The story behind Myanmar's chaotic switch in 1970 is just a perfect example of how not to do it. The decision wasn't about safety or economics. According to this widely cited explanation, it was based on the advice of a wizard, which led to the dangerous mismatch of cars and road rules that they still have to this day.
So why doesn't a country like the UK just switch to align with Europe? Well, the cost is just staggering. A conservative estimate just for changing signs is £6 billion. But the real cost is in rebuilding every single motorway interchange, which are geometrically designed for left-hand traffic, and replacing the entire fleet of public buses because their doors are on the wrong side.
So all of this brings us to the present day. The world is still divided, and this division creates real-world engineering challenges and keeps sparking the debate about which side is actually better.
At borders where left meets right, you need some very clever solutions. The Lotus Bridge that connects left-driving Macau to right-driving mainland China is an absolute marvel of engineering. It uses a spiral interchange that seamlessly flips traffic from one side to the other without anyone ever having to stop.
This leads to the ultimate question. Is one side actually safer? The data is pretty inconclusive, but there are some interesting theories. One is called the ocular dominance hypothesis, and it suggests that since most people are right-eye dominant, driving on the left might be slightly safer because it puts your dominant eye toward oncoming traffic, which is the bigger threat.
So if we look at the left-hand world today, you can see these really distinct historical patterns. In Europe, it's mostly an island thing. In Asia, it's a mix of samurai tradition and colonial history. Over in Oceania and Africa, it's basically the ghost of the British Empire. And in the Americas, it's a collection of former plantation islands. At the end of the day, driving on the left isn't just some arbitrary rule. It's a living fossil. Every time someone in London or Tokyo or Delhi gets in their car, they're taking part in a daily reenactment of history, guided by the logic of Roman soldiers, samurai warriors, and imperial engineers.
And that leaves us with a final thought. We've seen that the reasons for this divide are almost entirely historical. So the real question for the future is, what force, whether it's the global economy, a definitive safety breakthrough, or even the rise of self-driving cars, could ever be powerful enough to finally unite the world on one side of the road?